Howdy, I'm Kate Kavanaugh, and you're listening to the Mind, Body, and Soil podcast, where we're laying the groundwork for our land, ourselves, and for generations to come by looking at the way every thread of life is connected to one another. Communities above ground mirror the communities below the soil, which mirror the vast community of the cosmos. As the saying goes, as above, so below. Join me as we take a curious journey into agriculture, biology, history, spirituality, health, and so much more. I can't wait to unearth all of these incredible topics alongside you. Hello and welcome to the Groundwork Podcast. I am your host, Kate Kavanaugh, and it is such a pleasure to be here with you. I know that for listeners right now, this is still the Mind, Body, and Soil Podcast. We're in the midst of what I am calling the forever rebrand. I'm going to get to it one of these days, but I am really excited about today's guest. It was such a pleasure to host her. And like last week's guest, I got to meet her in person. And I just think that makes for a really special sort of rapport. For those of you that might be new tuning in, we have been having all kinds of fantastic explorations around materials and supply chains lately. And I think that one of the guiding forces in all of this has been this idea of exploring how the world has been made, especially from a historical and economical perspective. So you'll hear both my guest and I today are real big nerds when it comes to the Industrial Revolution and how much it changed. And we come back to that a lot on this podcast. And exploring how we might make it differently. And my guest today is actively building so many components of her world that she wants to see be different. And I think you will just adore her. So my guest today is Jill Winger. And late last spring, she had put out a little notice that she was going to be in my county and asking if she knew anyone that lived there. And I digitally raised my hand. And I want to be clear, I had been following Jill for a while, and I certainly knew who Jill Winger was before all of this. I'd read her book when it came out last year and was familiar with her trailblazing homestead content. But more than anything, I really enjoyed her weekly emails and how she is often able to touch on the tenets of what it is to be a person with goals, with multiple businesses. And she always has incredible resources and ways of thinking about growing into our dreams. But when I met Jill, I found just the deepest well of kinship and excitement. And I'll tell you, the two of us talked late into the night, that is for farmers, because it was past 8 p.m., about everything. And we really got into the real stuff, things that were weighing heavy on our hearts and cultural touchstones and our deep desires to build community and the inevitable messiness of building that community. We talked a lot about being a voice on the internet and the internet being a place that really wants you to be in a niche and being generalists with a lot of different interests. And we even might have touched on politics. As the summer passed, I began to think a lot about what I might want to talk about with Jill, and several things really rose to the top, all of which I think made it into this episode. At the heart of this episode, though, I believe are two people who really exist as I think most of us exist, which is as very complex, multifaceted, generalist individuals who exist firmly, which is to say not very firm at all, as both and people. I love both and people for whom nuance and the great expanse of gray is where they call home. I think it's that knowledge that multiple things can be true at once, sometimes in seeming opposition or paradox, something we might call non-duality, and that's okay. I love the idea that we can work hard and we can rest hard. We can build a life around doing things the old-fashioned way, as Jill calls it, as well as embracing aspects of modernity. We can put real time and effort, and you'll hear Jill and I talk about the enormous efforts we'll go not to go to the grocery store into our endeavors, while also looking for other ways to save time. I've been doing some personal work as of late that has me frequently coming back to the paradoxical nature of my own personality, that I am a walking paradox. Aspects of my personality are in direct opposition to one another and are both simultaneously true of me. And I want to share a pretty personal example. So, I am often motivated to complete things in order to be accountable to people in my life and to please them. Simultaneously, I sometimes, maybe even often, find that I am unable to complete things because of the weight of my desire of pleasing the people in my life. Okay, so there is a lot to unpack there that we are not going to get into right now. But the point is, both of these things are true. Now, this is a far more personal example of what, in researching this intro, is called embracing a paradoxical mindset, whereby we accept that there are opposing thoughts, demands, aspects of self, aspects of others, and beliefs in our lives. And I think for me, it comes back to this core idea that exists in quantum mechanics, right? That light is both a wave and a particle. As I was researching this, I found that studies even show that embracing this sort of tension, what they're calling a paradoxical mindset, allows us to be more flexible and creative. I think that this makes sense, that so many aspects of our nature, of nature itself, nature at the very fundamental atomic level, are paradoxical. But I have to tell you that on the personal work side of things, it can be frustrating as all get out. And I think that's okay because oftentimes it's in the frustration that we are creating new neural pathways. This is true, as well as new relationships, I think, both with ourselves and with others. And I also think that this sort of thinking opens us up to being able to look at both or more, if it's not just a binary black and white situation, sides of an issue or an argument, whether that's on a very local level at home or a bigger cultural level. So, inside this episode is a nugget about building community with individuals that are around you. And more often than not, that means that these people are not necessarily going to be like minded. And I know many of us, myself included, are seeking like minded community. And I'll tell you from personal experience, this is all from personal experience, that sometimes what I want isn't necessarily what I need. And in having friends across a variety of spectrums, something that I consider myself lucky to have happened into and also to have had a sort of upbringing as well as early life in my 20s that kind of forced me into that situation. And so having these friends across a variety of spectrums, whether that's political, religious, various disciplines for work and their career and their home life, from rural to urban spaces, I have found that my life is so much richer for it. And I think, especially, I'm really working on building community in a place, in a very rural place that is relatively new to me, where I don't have longstanding relationships. And it's been vital for me to lean on my ability to embrace a very wide slice of life. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. And this is that piece around sort of my upbringing, which is outside of this, but my early 20s, I had this experience of running an agricultural business, and I had to parlay with people across the political spectrum. And I'm really glad that that was the case. It sort of forced me out of a very curated community and forced my hand to see different viewpoints and to hear stories I might not have listened to otherwise, as well as to just get to know and love people beyond these sort of ideological markers. And I find this increasingly relevant to my life as we enter the last quarter of 2024. And I'm being a little purposely vague here. I'll also say that shortly after this interview, I heard another interview with Dr. Jamil Zaki, whose new book, Hope for Cynics: The Surprising Science of Human Goodness, is now on my nightstand. I haven't finished it just yet. But in this interview, he discussed a study where that he conducted, bringing together people of opposing viewpoints into discussion. And the results surprised even him. And he goes into this in the book and on any interview that he's done where everyone walked away viewing the person that was holding this opposing viewpoint to them as more open-minded and far less hostile than they thought at the outset, and de-escalated their intense emotions about them. And I think that this is really crazy because it kind of goes in, it's not what we expect. It's not even what the author of the study expected. And I know that it's been true for me. And as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about in last week's interview with Brock Dolman, he mentioned that, quote, hope is a verb with its shirt sleeves rolled up, end quote. And I loved this. Hope is a verb with its shirt sleeves rolled up. This is so true of community and building community for me, that we have to do the work. And as Jill and I attest to in this episode, and this is Jill's word, it is messy work, but I think it's good work. And at times I think it might be some of the best work that we can be out there doing. Okay, are you ready for the kicker to this intro? I really wanted to kind of bring this back to something deeply personal and honestly something that I've been struggling with pretty deeply on this podcast as of late. So, I feel very motivated to get this podcast out to you, dear listener, each week. I feel accountable to you in the best way possible. I also want to make you happy. I want to make your balls be delighted. And as I wade into ever deeper and ever grayer territory, I also get nervous. I try to see each episode from all these different perspectives. Did I offend anyone? Did I hurt anyone's feelings? What if people disagree? And then I get stuck and I freeze. And I have troubles releasing the episode because of the weight of wanting to please you, which, and I want to be crystal clear about this, all of this is on me and not you. And this is a perfect example of how I get caught up in my own paradoxes, my Mobius strips of logic, and my own Penrose steps, right? So this is going back to that personal paradox that I've been working on, where I am often motivated to complete things in order to be accountable to people in my life, and simultaneously, I sometimes find that I am unable to complete things because of the weight of desire of pleasing the people in my life. So, perfect example and just a little insight into my mind. I hope that inside this episode, you find the complexity of two people trying to figure it out where we can and to let it flow where we can't. I find Jill's words so salient and so conducive to what it means to grow as a human and as an entrepreneur. Her work is big. Her work is so big and sprawling and all-encompassing, and her nuance and her ability to communicate concepts is clear, concise, and often knocks me off my feet. Her work in the world of homesteading is certainly deep and unparalleled, and I encourage anyone tackling any components of homesteading to seek her out for it. For me, though, it is also her work on growth. Inside there is kind of the real linchpin for me. Her work about what it means to live on purpose and with intention, even when it's uncomfortable, and also finding a space of ease, as you'll hear more. I hope that you'll seek out all of Jill's incredible resources, from her book, Old Fashioned on Purpose, Cultivating a Slower, More Joyful Life, her new course, Meal Craft, on building simple meals out of what you have around you. Her 2025 Old Fashioned on Purpose planner is out, and she has so many resources on all of her social media channels, which are linked in the show notes. And she is just, for me, the queen of practical and functional and also of depth. I want to mention here that this is our 96th episode. And as we creep up on 100 episodes, I have a really big ask. But here's the deal. It takes about 15 seconds, and you only have to lift your thumbs to do it. And it is to reach 200 ratings and reviews on Spotify and iTunes before my 100th episode. And I've got about 50 to go in each place. So this is a pretty big ask, but takes you no time. Just go to the show, leave a rating. And if you feel so called, leave a review. It really helps other people find the episode. And if you loved the episode, please share it with friends, share it with family. Word of mouth is really how podcasts spread. And as this little podcast of mine grows kind of long legs at 100 episodes, I want it to walk to some new places for me, with all of us. I want to thank you because it is only through your support that I am here. I am so grateful for your earballs, and just truly, it is a delight to bring you each and every episode. I'm also really grateful for my sponsors, Redmond Real Salt, where you can get 15% off with the code mindbodysoil_15, Sundry's Farm Garlic, which is shipping garlic for all of your culinary and pantry needs right now at sundriesfarm.com. And Bahey Running, where you can get barefoot and grounded, that's the key, grounded running shoes, and you can get 10% off using the code KATE10. All of that jam is in the show notes. And now, without further ado, and no more blah, 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 here is Jill. So yes. I've hit record so that we can, I am not great at texting people back. Yeah. And this is something that I've thought a lot about in friendship and lost a lot of friendships over it. And now I've started building friendships around this concept that I am not the best at texting back. And I'll tell people that kind of towards the front of a relationship, and that it never has to do with you. If it did, I would tell you.
Yes.
You can just trust that I would tell you. It's just that life happens, and I don't think we're meant to be just at people's beck and call and response. And we are also all living busy things, and things slip the wayside. And this is grace is the theme of
yes,
all things that I do in communication. So I don't know.
I think it is such an important topic because we are ultra connected to a fault with our phones. Of course, we talk about that a lot. I think people are aware of that. But yeah, I just honestly, I sometimes feel fatigued by correspondence. And it's not that, like you said, I'm not mad at anyone. I'm not like when someone texts me, I'm never like, oh, I have to answer them. It's not that. It's not like one person. It's just like, there are days where I get to the end of the day, I'm like, I physically cannot answer anyone else. Even if it's a simple, benign request, I cannot.
Absolutely.
So I think we just get maxed out.
Yeah. And then it slips down. Right. And and one of two things happen with me. Either I forget about it, or I think about it over and over again and how I've forgotten about it and feel like it's been too long and then can't re-access it. So either I've forgotten or I can't forget, but either way I can't get back on the texting horse.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I think that this is a really important nuance. I was saying before we hopped on that it was, I've just been looking forward to this interview, and we got to meet last spring, which makes this even more fun to actually already have a little bit of an in-person rapport.
Can I just say that was so magical? Like I told my sister and my husband, I was like, I just met my friend Kate for the first time. We met online in a gazebo in a New England churchyard, and she brought this like organic, locally grown picnic. I'm like, it was like something out of a movie. It was so cool. That was the coolest
It was
thing.
amazing. It was amazing. And I didn't expect, we talked into the dark. It got dark and we were still talking. It was really fantastic. And it felt really good to connect in person. And I think we have a lot in common, some of which I might tease out in this interview that excited me.
Yeah, the connection was beyond, I knew we had things in common, but we connected more deeply than I thought we would, so which was wonderful.
Yeah,
a wonderful treat.
And it was really fun to have you right here in my home county. When you put out that call, is anybody in Washington County? And I was like, oh, me actually.
Yeah. Who would have thought? I didn't realize, I've never been to upstate New York, and I know you're not in New York, but I'm like, this is so farmy and so agrarian and so beautiful, and not near as populated as I thought it would be. It was just the whole weekend was a great surprise when I went to that conference. Yeah.
I love that. I love a good surprise. Yeah. So I spent a lot of time going back through a lot of your work, and I read the book when it came out, and we've been in each other's Instagram orbits for a long
Yes.
time. But I also went through, I'm the most consistent opener of your newsletters. And
Oh.
I went back through and I read through some of my favorite newsletters. And as I was going back through them, it was thinking a lot about you and some of the conversations we'd had and kind of teasing some pieces out from the book and these newsletters and your Instagram posts. And I was thinking a lot about old fashioned on purpose in this
Mm-hmm.
name. And I feel like I hear a lot about and see a lot of old fashioned in your work or framed as old fashioned. But when I was going back through, what I saw was so much on purpose. And one of the reasons I love opening your newsletters, one of the many reasons I loved the book is the really thought out intentionality that you bring to everything you do. And I know you've said this, but you like to lead an examined life
Yeah.
and of really cultivating a sense of purpose, both in the how you do things and really considering that, and also purpose with the meaning of meaning, right? That there's both this considered how and this deeper connection and meaning. And so I just wanted to toss that out there, like that you are one of my favorite people to access for how we look at how we choose our choices on purpose.
Mm. Wow. First, that's like, thank you for the kind words. That was so kind of you. And yeah, I think that's an interesting theme to pull out. I don't think a lot of people have been able to recognize that stream through what I do, like you just so eloquently just stated. But yeah, and it's interesting. That is really it's an important part of everything I do. Both Christian and my husband and I have wondered for a long time where that came from because I've been wired differently since I was a little girl, and I don't know why. It doesn't appear to be from my parents. My parents don't live necessarily like we do. They choose to live maybe a little more of a standard life, not as much into the examining. Maybe I over examine sometimes, but
You and
I've
me
often
both.
wondered where it came from. Was it a result of having the opposite as a child that I ended up, sometimes we do
Yeah.
we go the opposite way of whatever our families are. So I don't know. It's interesting
Mhm.
though, but I love that you pulled that out from the newsletters and the books and things.
Yeah, it just feels, I think in a lot of ways, the book is so filled with all of these different and beautiful ways to kind of access a homesteading lifestyle, whether you have land or not, and to kind of lean into what it means to dig into this way of doing things that we've lost in this rush towards progress and modernity. But I also felt like there was this underlying piece that is so much about the personal growth work in many
Mm,
ways that
yes.
we come to when we come to this lifestyle through leaning into challenge,
Yeah.
leaning into discomfort, leaning into resiliency, and I think also occupying what it has to end up being, this sort of both and space.
Mm. Yes. And I have found that the things that I love most in life, the things that have been my biggest passions thus far, and this has kind of become cliche, so I hesitate to say it, but I'm going to say it anyway. Like they're each a personal growth or a personal development journey wrapped in the wrapper of homesteading or horsemanship or
Yeah.
entrepreneurship. And that's really when I look at all because I have some weird interests, right? That wouldn't seem complimentary at first glance. But when I break it all down, I'm like, I love the personal development that comes. Like, and really when I choose to do a project, and we've done some crazy things the last few years, starting a charter school, buying a little restaurant.
Yeah.
The reason we do it, people are like, that doesn't make sense. Why? I'm like, because I want the discomfort and I love the growth. I'm obsessed. I'm addicted to the growth that comes at the end of the hard thing. And I think that's that common thread. And really that's homesteading started it all because that was my first little baby step into the world of doing something unorthodox, doing something difficult, doing something uncomfortable. And that's why I really, attribute all of our wild and wonderful adventures back to that homesteading origin. And it's kind of crazy when you think about it.
Yeah. And I can see how there's a lot of that growth that's wrapped up in these different journeys and packages, and so much of it. And I have, when I kind of prep this, I have a lot of different quotes from you about getting uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because I think that that's really at the heart of so much of this. And I think that and I found a similar thing in what we've done here in homesteading, is that it has presented me with a constant sense of discomfort and having to go through that discomfort into a sense of resiliency.
Yes.
And I pulled this was from your Instagram, this idea that, and these are your words, you can't shrink to greatness. If personal growth is your goal, pushing through the uncomfortable stuff is the only way. And that this is true in homesteading, in entrepreneurship, and relationships. And that the more I push myself out of my comfort zone, the more exciting life gets.
Yeah.
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 I love that. I hope you're enjoying this episode with Jill Winger. I know her and I get a little bit salty. And speaking of salt, it is the theme of my fall. I spent the weekend making cheese, canning applesauce, pickling some bits and bobs, and cooking up a storm, which meant that Redmond Real Salt was by my side for all of it. As we enter the season of preservation and look towards winter, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, I'm thinking about what I need in my pantry to get me through. One of the things I love about Redmond is actually buying salt in bulk. So I buy 25-pound bags of Redmond kosher salt and grind it to my preferred fineness so it suits a wide variety of needs. Now, you do not have to be super extra like me. They do have 10 and 25-pound bags in fine, powder, coarse, and kosher, whatever you're into. But for me, the 25-pound bags last my household around 6 months and are a great investment. And honestly, it's an investment in my health because with Redmond, you're getting salt mined from an ancient seabed, protected from modern pollutants, and packed with over 60 trace minerals. But it's also an investment in my local community and bioregion. Salt that is mined right in Utah by a business with, and I have to be honest here, the most incredible practices and full of the kindest and most generous and just awesome humans. I actually get to go out there next week to visit the salt mine. It's also an investment in keeping things simple and delicious. One of the things I love about the bounty of this season is the meat, the vegetables. They taste amazing with very little intervention. And a delicious salt like Redmond's brings out all of that flavor. Not to mention, and I think this is important to mention, one of Redmond's core tenets is living on purpose, and anyone listening to this episode might resonate with that message. You can stock up on Redmond, whether you're looking for bulk salt, smaller shakers, their incredible Relight hydration powder, or their agricultural products at redmond.life. And you can get 15% off your order by using the code mindbodysoil_15. Again, that's the code mindbodysoil_15 for 15% off when you go to redmond.life or hit the link in the show notes. Let's get back to my salty interview with Jill.
I don't know. I think I said I didn't know where it started. I think this passion for me around discomfort and hard things and, pushing myself beyond what I think my capabilities are. I think it happened, actually, now that I think about it. When I was 18, we were living pretty orthodox. I was living pretty safe. I was pretty risk adverse. And for some reason, I still don't know why, I chose to move 1,200 miles away from home to attend a tiny community college in Wyoming. And it was scary because I didn't know anybody here. And it was in an equine program, which was also scary in its own right. And so that was a big leap. And I had to really push through a lot of fear and a lot of feeling very uncomfortable, completely out of my normal environment. But the things that came from that were so incredible, changed my life. I mean, it's really what got me here in Wyoming and started this whole journey. And I started to ask myself, I think after that, what else can I do that's outside of what I feel is the realm of possibility? So that is what started that, I think. But then the other piece that happened is I started to feel so alive. And then I was like loving life, feeling like, I mean, it's not always roses and sunshine. I'm sure there's hard days, but for the most part, the trajectory is like, this is freaking awesome. I love this. This is me. This is who I was meant to be. But I look around at everybody else and I'm like, they're not loving life. They seem to be not super happy with where they're at. They don't seem to be living to their fullest. They don't seem to be waking up with purpose. And I'm like, what's the difference? And does everyone have a purpose? And can everyone find a purpose? And could everybody feel like I feel? And I started to ask those questions. And I think that's where I started to wanting to bring that to the general public more. Because I feel like most people, and my husband and I talk about this a lot, I think the average modern person is very sedated, and we're living a very sedated life for many, many reasons. And we're pushing against everything humans are really wired to have and be and eat, and how we're wired to live. And I think it creates this malaise, and it's just this blah. And one way to wake up is homesteading, one way to wake up is entrepreneurship, or just finding what lights you up. But I don't remember what your question was, but I had a point to this story. But I think that's where that obsession came for me, both my personal life and like, how can I bring this to the world? How can I help other people find that thing that lights them up and gets them up in the morning?
Yeah, I mean, you said something, the purpose that we get out of bed, like finding a sense of purpose and how we get out of bed. And I think that again, for me, there's that duality there of purpose as in the intentional choosing of a choice, and purpose in terms of cultivating a sense of meaning and even joy in a culture that feels increasingly sedated, narcotized, asleep. I don't know. Just going through the paces, right? Going through these prescribed ways of being that aren't really that old. That was something that I also noticed in the book, right? We're kind of handed this societal story, this societal orthodoxy, and it's really easy to just sort of slip into that without sort of being like, wait, how and why did we get here? And is this where I want to be?
Yes. And that's my favorite question to ask is like, why are we here? How did we get here? Because like you said, it's not that old. It's like so much of what we just take for granted. We accept that this is humanity. This is the way it has to be. It's like 150 years old, max. On so many of these realms. And I'm like, we're all just in this rut. We're just like in this, these robots. And I'm like, we don't have to be like, there's so much more. And I just, that revelation was so earth shattering for me. I just I want everybody to have a piece of that. And that's it lights me up.
I mean, I think that you and I are actually coming from a very similar space in that. As I was rereading the book, and I don't think I caught this in the first pass, I think you and I share an obsession with the Industrial Revolution.
We totally
and with that period, period of history in which that mindset shift is really occurring, that we are entering into this very different story of humanity and what it would mean to step outside of that and get there. And I'll go to this because it actually teases at something else I want to talk about with you. But when I picked up the book again before this interview, I've been looking at, and I think you know this, a lot of economics on the podcast. And we're always looking at the Industrial Revolution because it's pretty important shift in history. But I pulled this quote, and so maybe this will tease at both the Industrial Revolution and something that you mentioned before, which you have all of these seemingly disparate interests, right? And I am the same, and I call this generalism, and I think that you do too. And I think as homesteaders, it's a perfect place to be, and homesteading, entrepreneurship. So I'll read this back to you. You say, historically, humans have been generalists. That means we knew how to do stuff, and lots of it. Basic survival demanded that a person be able to hunt, grow, and prepare food, understand simple medicinal knowledge, make tools and weapons, find safe water, and handle animals. However, as the idea of specialization became popular about the same time that factories entered the scene, the need to possess a vast collection of skills no longer felt necessary. Adam Smith, and I did not know this, Adam
Mm-hmm.
Smith first introduced the notion of specialists in The Wealth of Nations. The idea is that if you can teach people how to do single small tasks very well, they can come together to produce things in a lightning fast, cost-effective way. Smith famously underscored this point by using the example of a straight pin factory. While a single pin maker might only be able to make a handful of pins on his own each day, if the process is broken down into distinct operations, the process becomes much more efficient. Smith estimated that if pin making were divided into 18 different steps, a group of 10 men could produce roughly 48,000 pins each day. And you go on to say, it's a pretty cool concept, isn't it? In fact, it was so compelling that it revolutionized our entire culture. And it certainly makes sense if you're going to start a production line. The problem is, like so many aspects of industrialization, it's gotten a little off balance. Over time, we've hyper-specialized every part of our lives, and our skill sets have atrophied as a result.
Yes.
I was so struck by this because it teased at, my love of looking at the Industrial Revolution and also economics. Adam Smith was a little prior to the Industrial Revolution, and combining this real mindset shift of specialization that I think a lot of us have internalized. And I think the call back to maybe a homesteading or an old-fashioned life, whatever you want to call it, is to employ a sense of generalism, to be interested in a lot of things and to feed those interests and to have some purpose and to not just be this sort of singular cog in this machine that we feel. I don't even think we notice, right? Like, and this is something I say on the podcast all the time. These are the waters we swim in that we don't even see. If you've listened to me talk at all or follow me on social media, you know I am an avid walker and hiker, and over the years, I have tried a lot of different shoes. I'm really big on a barefoot, zero-drop shoe that allows my foot to follow its natural movements and really feel the ground beneath my feet, something that has a flexible sole. And what I've always wanted to be able to find is something that is also grounded. I want to connect to Earth. I want the electrons to flow from the ground and into my body. And research shows that that has a lot of benefits, and very, very few shoes on the market do this. But Bahe, that's B-A-H-E, it's the Hindi word for flow, is the first shoe I've found that meets all of this criteria. I got my first pair several weeks ago, and I have already put in over 75 miles in them, and I am absolutely in love. Not only are they the most functional shoe I've ever owned, but they're also beautifully designed and look fantastic. I have the Revive running shoes in Forest and a pair of the Rediscover hiking boots in Dune on pre-order. So much of my life, and as you hear in this episode, is about decreasing the amount of unnecessary padding between me and the natural world, and about building real connection. And these shoes are allowing me to connect directly to Earth and receive all of those grounding benefits, from decreased inflammation, increased relaxation, and ultimately a cascade of benefits stemming from grounding's benefits for mitochondrial health, all with barefoot walking and just this incredibly beautiful aesthetic. I can't recommend them enough, and you can get 10% off using the code KATE10, that's KATE10, when you go to bahe.co. That's BAHE.co, and use the code KATE10 for 10% off.
Yes. And what I see happening as this product of hundreds of years of this, that's now, like you said, people don't even realize there's any other option. It's just the way it is. We are so specialized that people are scared to step out of their specialty. And you see that so much in modern society. And you have to be careful with this, because I think there is a time and place to have higher education and certifications and, totally. The letters behind your name, et cetera. There is a time and place for that. But we've gotten so obsessed with that. Like, you can see it online all the time. If someone offers a bit of advice, they'll say, "Who are you to say that? You didn't go to college for that." You don't do that
Yes.
for a living. And I'm like, well, okay, wait a second. Some of this is common sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can say, you know, this food is healthier, and you don't have to have 8 years of schooling to know that this food is healthier. It's okay to say that. But you see society becoming so obsessed that we're already there. We are so obsessed with this idea that you stay in your lane, you never look out of your lane, and you can't think for yourself until an expert tells you you have permission to do so. It's like, whoa, specialization gone so wrong, so very wrong.
I hadn't even thought of that component of how we look for expertise in a way that it is that internalized idea of specialization. And because you're absolutely right. And I think there's sort of these layers to this, that there's generalism within an individual, right? I consider myself a bit of a generalist.
Yes.
There's also generalism at a sort of societal level where you do need some specialization to come together to build some various things and concepts, but that we've put that on other people. And I think in a lot of different ways, our expectation that you must be an expert, this hewing to, and this is getting into sort of, be careful here, this hewing to the science, which itself has become specialized in a way that I think does a detriment to the complexity of everything.
Yes.
And this looking at single variables versus multiple things, looking at this gray space, this nuance, this reason, which you are, you know, I was telling Josh this morning when I was talking about this, to me, you are a voice of reason and nuance and consideration and gray area, which I love. I seek that out.
And I also seek that out, which is why I was attracted to your content the second I found it. Because I'm like, oh, she thinks both sides. She can hold two ideas at the same time. And I am very passionate about that, especially as our world becomes so polarized and so like black and white. But even more so, I'm passionate about it because I didn't used to be that way. And I've lived black and white, hardcore dogma for a good period of my life. And I saw where it ended. I saw where it takes you. And I'm like, doesn't work. So I think it's so important to keep that. But that reductionist piece, it's everywhere. Like you said, it is you see it in medicine, you see it in the sciences. And I think it's just this continued side effect of that hyper specialization, where we just get so walled off in one field or one idea that we don't see everything's connected. Everything is so complex, which I feel like every time I go back, it's ironic. Every time I go back to generalism and nature and simplify, that's when my horizons are broadened to, once again, everything is complex. Everything is connected. Everything touches each other in ways we don't understand. And it's funny because you go full circle over and over again.
Yeah. Will you actually tease that out a little bit? The more that you go into simple, the more you find complex. Because I think, you know, in this podcast, one of my biggest goals with it is to illustrate complexity and interconnectedness. And it's funny that sometimes when we subtract in life, it's easier to actually see the complexity of it and hold that. And I'm not sure if that's what you're teasing at, but I want to know.
It is. Yes. And how do I want to say that? Yeah. So ironically, the more I have sat in the gray in my life, and I have been with the nuance, and I have decided to leave the black and white rigid thinking and that reductionist thinking, and really, and I did that in not such, I'm making it sound really philosophical and highly intelligent. It was really more just like, I want to simplify. I want to get back to basics. I want to cut out the noise of what modernity is telling me and just go back to what I know to be true, which is what nature. It's what it's in front of me. It's what I can touch and hold and feel and taste. Yeah. And people would call that simplifying. But what I have found when I have gone deeper into that world, things show themselves to be quite complex. And the more you learn about those simple things, the things that a lot of people scoff at in our modern culture, you start to realize that everything is connected, that everything is highly complex. You know, one example, I've read Nourishment by Fred Provenza after our conversation that day. And like blew my mind. And I now am talking about flavors constantly. And my husband's like, oh my gosh, why are you so obsessed with flavors? I'm like, it's post-ingestive feedback and we've lost it. And the animals and the goats and the black brush. Anyway, so love the book. But just reading that book, and I've heard some of those principles before, but the way he fleshed them out was so brilliant. And I'm like, it's so complex. It's so complex. And how maybe when we're just having a drink with artificial flavoring, we just think we're having a lemonade, but it's actually affecting all these systems in our body and our microbiome and our taste sensors and telling our body what it needs nutritionally or what it doesn't, or blocking it. And I'm like, it's so complex in a beautiful, fascinating way that you can never understand it all, even if you spend a lifetime studying it. And that's the stuff I just completely geek out on. I know you do too, but I'm like, it's just beautiful. And I love feeling like this tiny speck in it and not knowing everything, but just seeing little glimpses. And to me, that's one of the beauties of going back to simple and then realizing there's this gift of complexity behind that it's actually pretty fascinating.
I don't think I had ever thought about it that way. And I really love that when we enter through this, I don't know, I'm thinking about it like gates or a portal or some sort of, when we seek out simple, we're able to see layers of complexity. And I don't think I had really considered that, right? When there's the simplicity of just how flavorful a steak you grew yourself is, or a tomato, or an herb in a garden, that what is underlying that simplicity is this complexity that's so complex that there's also a space for mystery within it, right?
Yes.
There isn't this, and I think that also teases at some of the dogma that we were talking about, right? That as we reduce things and reduce ourselves into little niches or little groups, we miss some of the mystery and complexity and strangeness of this life that we can't describe, that can't be codified by an expert or a scientific paper. And this is something I love about Fred's work too, is that it tries to tease at some of that while holding that you can't tease it apart, that there is some mystery.
I did love that too, because he doesn't just go, it's science, which science is wonderful. He brings so much science into the book, it's like so much, like I couldn't even grasp it all. But he still leaves that, and I love that mystery, and I feel so satiated with that mystery when I can just go, I understand a piece of it, but I'll never understand all of it, and no one will probably ever understand all of it. And I love that. I just love that feeling so much. Whenever I'm in nature and I'm fully immersed in nature, I always get that. And I like it. It makes me feel safe in a weird way, and I can't describe it.
It is officially fall, and I know that for many of us, that means that we are in a rush to fill our cupboards, we are preserving food, putting up the garden spoils of summer. Some of us might even be looking at next year's harvest. In both cases, it means it's time to talk about garlic. Sundry's farm makes the most gorgeous, earthy, spicy, delicious garlic all around. It has big, easy-to-peel cloves, which are going to be perfect for stocking your pantry with over the winter. Makes meals so easy because you have to peel fewer cloves of garlic, and they're very easy to peel. And it's also perfect for the same reasons for seed garlic, because it will create garlic that has those big, easy-peeling cloves. Sundry's farm has both seed and culinary garlic, and it is hand-grown in Idaho and tended with joy, and I mean this, just absolute joy, as well as no herbicides or pesticides. And it is certified white rot-free by the state of Idaho. I think one of the best parts, though, is the flavor. It is spicy and piquant, earthy and somehow citrusy, and whether it's seed or culinary garlic, Sundry's Farm has you covered with both hard and soft neck varietals like Music, Chestnut Red, and Purple Glazer. I have this beautiful braid of Purple Glazer that's actually sitting on my counter right now because I used it so much this weekend. And it is just absolutely delicious and gorgeous. And the practices of Rob and Jillian over at Sundry's Farm are absolutely unparalleled. Sundry's Farm garlic is available now. The shipping is here, and they have a wide range of varietals and grab bags for both planting and culinary needs, and you can get them by going to sundriesfarm.com. That's SUNDRIESFARM.com to grab this seed and culinary garlic for the year. You don't need a coat, just have your hankering for some incredible hand-grown garlic ready and in action. Now, back to it with Jill. No, I have that same experience, that there is a comfort in the mystery, I think. And I think that this also in some ways is very antithetical to a simplified society that seeks to know all things in this. I don't even quite know how to explain it. It's a false knowing, right?
Exactly.
It's this sort of one-sided, one view knowing, as opposed to this being able to step around something and see how incredibly multifaceted it is. And it's just this tiny little. You're just looking at one facet, and when you zoom out, you can see that there's so much more. And I think that you're right. We're constantly doing that, and that mindset has just become so embedded in
Yes.
culture. I didn't even see that piece of it. I read a quote on the podcast the other day from David Foster Wallace gave a commencement address, and in it he says, they're two young fish and they're swimming around and past this older fish, and he looks at them and he says, "Hey boys, how's the water?" And then they go, "What's water?"
Yeah.
And it's that idea that oftentimes, right, that we're swimming in this milieu that we don't even recognize how much of it has been shaped by these historical forces. And
yes. Which continually fascinates me. Just how, well, how did we get to here? Why is education like this? Why is our food system like this? Why is our medical system like again? No one realizes it's water. They're in water, but they don't know it's in water. And I just I don't know. I just have such a fascination with why are we here in this system, in this industrialized world the way it is, and what do we think is normal that actually isn't normal or actually is just a construct. And so so fascinating.
I think there's too, to kind of go back to the beginning of our conversation and talking a little bit about choosing discomfort or going into uncomfortable things. I think at times it is uncomfortable to look at some of these stories, these society-wide stories, and to step outside of them, to step outside the orthodoxy, to do things differently.
Yes.
Whether that's and I think you have done so many of those things, to step outside and to homestead, to make most of your food from scratch, to start very big, ambitious businesses, to homeschool your kids, right? That you have this drive that we kind of talked about, its genesis, to constantly step outside of that orthodoxy. And it's not comfy.
No, it's not. Because society, I always, humans are herd animals.
Yeah.
And humans
absolutely.
are tribal, and there's a reason the tribe is a tribe, and they want you to stay in line in the tribe. And you can look back for thousands of years. That's just how human civilizations work. There's safety in the tribe, and there's incentives for not going outside of the prescribed rules and boundaries. And so we still have that very deeply imprinted upon us, and you can feel it every time you choose to make a different medical choice, or you choose to eat differently, or you choose to educate your children differently, or you choose to grow food in organic soil. You still can feel that.
Oh, yeah.
And it is extremely uncomfortable, both from what you hear them saying around you and also just internally. Sometimes I still push back because I, examined life, right? I'm always examining what I'm doing. And I'm like, wait, is this right? Is this right for me? Is this okay? Am I too far? Am I too far one way? And so I think, but like we've mentioned several times, you can't get to the good stuff. You can't get to the dopamine reward. You can't get to the mountaintop unless you do push through that, both the internal and the external feedback that's uncomfortable.
Yeah. Thank you for giving name to something that I try to do is when you're stepping outside of something, continuing to kind of come back to that examination of it being like, oh, wait, where am I getting this? Is this still what I want? Does this still make sense? Does this still, where is this coming from? And thank you for giving name to that, because I think that that's an important step that we also sometimes miss as we, it's the idea. I think about this a lot. when you feel outside of a lot of societal norms, if you identify so much with an outsider, then I feel like I've become a reflexive contrarian.
Totally. Yes.
And I always want to check that reflex a little bit and be like, is this just like my rebellious reflex?
Yes.
Yeah.
Same. Also a reflex. I mean, I have that tendency totally. Like, oh, herd's going this way. I'm going this way. But I have to be like, wait, but is that smart? Is that wise? And you know, we've seen it. This is a little bit spicy territory. We've seen this in the homesteading movement a lot the last few years, in response to primarily the COVID era. You know, a lot of people awakened for the first time, which is great. They started to ask questions. They started to be more curious about choices and societal institutions, which I love. But I've seen everyone for the first time become hyper contrarian and super rebellious, which there's a part of me, I'm like, amens, go, go, go. But there's also a part of me like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, we can't go so far over here that we've now formed a new tribe that's equally as dogmatic as the old tribe. It's just on different sides of the aisle. Like, we have to be careful in how we're approaching this.
This is something I wasn't sure if this would come up and I wanted to leave space for it, but I did pull something that you had said about this. And this is something I love about your work is that it's not, you talked about earlier that maybe some of the way you are was in response to how you were raised, right? That the pendulum tends to, that oftentimes we will swing away from parents or we'll stay very much in that same line of parents. And I think that society and certain segments and certain things of society play off one another, pushing one another further from that sort of nuanced, reasoned, gooey, sticky, uncomfortable gray area. And I think that this has happened in the homesteading. And you said something, and this is a quote of yours. You say, quote, "You can be both unconventional and prepared without consuming fear and paranoia 24/7." And came back to just being in a place of reasonable gray, and I loved it.
Gray is not as much fun as black and white, though. It's a hard sell. Like, if I wanted to go viral, I know exactly how to go viral. I know exactly how I could get a YouTube video to get millions of views. You just have to add some fear, a little bit of, sprinkle in some fear, black and white, some dogma, some extrapolation, and bam. Like, it's really easy. It's a really proven formula. And I don't want to offend anyone who's, if you're questioning things, that's great. If you have some mistrust about our societal institutions, that's normal and that's good. You should be questioning those. But also, it's easier to just plug yourself into one line of thinking and to never question it and to be subscribed to that fear. The fear it can be addictive. It can be addictive to see what the next big scary thing is. It's harder to sit in that middle. But it's harder. Yeah. People don't love it when I say that. I get a lot of pushback when I say that. People are very, protective of those fears and those theories that they have. And I get it. I mean, everyone's a little bit unmoored right now with where things are. Society feels shaky, feels uncertain. But it's a tricky balance, especially as a content creator, to hold true to where I like to be in the gray and to hold on to that nuance, but also still create content that's true to that. So I don't know. It's an interesting time to be alive, I think.
I mean, I think that's one of the things, and I want to hold space too for the fact that, you were at the very beginning of what was a big push to homesteading. And I think you've seen a really big story arc play out there and very much at the center of that story arc, and seeing how maybe this movement, for lack of a better word, has shifted over the last decade or so.
Yes.
I've kind of been on the outskirts of that, just being in the meat and farming and ag world. But to see how much that has changed. And so I want to hold that piece. And then there's this other piece too about, when we're making a living or that we have a business that might have more content orientation, that nuance is a hard sell, which is such a nuance and generalism, right? To not niche down, to not just be the homestead person, or, I struggle a lot with, well, you're a butcher. Well, that is one thing that I am.
One thing. Yeah.
You know, and so there's this piece of, you know, having seen the Homestead arc and kind of sitting in the gray and wanting to hold people gently, because our fears are something that feel intimate and hot button in a very hot button world.
Yes.
And kind of how we navigate this space.
Man, I wish I had the perfect formula, because don't we all love formulas?
Yeah, we need a protocol for this.
We need a protocol, black and white protocol. Yeah, I don't know. It's been fascinating to watch the story arc, like you said, and it started, and why I loved the movement so much at the beginning, and why I was one of the first people to start speaking to the movement, whatever you want, movement, quote unquote.
Yeah.
It was back in those
didn't have a better
days.
word.
Yeah, 2010 or whatever. There was like me and 3 other people talking about it, because it was so warm and fuzzy, kumbaya, everyone's welcome. And we had folks from the right and folks from the left, and everyone was coming together to grow food. And it was extremely general, very skill-based, very just like one big happy village. And I loved it. Like it was just, it felt like the most wholesome thing. And I think it's the nature of movements and the nature of when people come together and things grow and homesteading is not an organization, but it's a like-minded group of people pushing towards a common end, I suppose.
It's become a bucket of, I don't want to use this word either, way of an identifier.
It is an identifier. Yeah, it is. And before it was, my contrarian self loved it because it was less definable. And I grow my own food, and they're like, what? Well, like, I call it a homestead. They're like, a homestead. And I loved that era, because I was like, it was so contrarian, like nobody knew what it was. But as things do, they become more popular. And so now it is an identifier. And now it's like mom of 3, Christian homesteader. And it's just like something we list. It's just another adjective, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just I'm just making an observation. But it's changed, and it's become this movement of being different and being contrarian and being countercultural now has its own set of rules and norms and standards and stereotypes. Yeah. And so my contrarian self now feels inclined, which I'm still questioning, right? Because I have to make sure I'm examining, like, wait.
The reflexive contrarian.
Reflexive, yeah, totally. I'm like, wait, I don't want to be following anyone's rules on what is a homesteader and what it has to look like. And so now I feel like I'm pushing back against the movement. So it's weird to be like ping-ponging, but that's where I'm at right now. And I don't know, I try to balance with content and where I'm bringing perspective and how I'm teaching. And sometimes I feel like I do it well, and other times I just get fed up and I just ghost the internet for a while, which is probably not a bad thing. But sometimes I'm just like, I don't know what to do. I just I'm going to go ride my horse. Sorry, close the computer. But then I usually come back and I have some thoughts. So I don't know. It's a weird up and down, and I don't have it all figured out for sure.
I mean, from an outsider's perspective, you handle it with such aplomb, and you are one of my favorite people out there, because you come back to that gray space and because you offer some perspective.
Well, thank you for saying that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean it. I want to tease at something you said, because this is something that has actually been on my mind, and this wasn't on my list, but you said that you came to the homesteading crowd movement, whatever we want to call it. Because it's a place where we can all gather. And this is something that brought me to agriculture, that I loved ag and food and meat, because it was a big table. And it was a big table of a lot of different types of people.
Yeah.
And that has also changed, right? That's changed a little bit in my butcher meat world versus where it was in 2010 when I started out on this journey.
Yes.
And I think that, I don't know, something that has actually been hard for me with the podcast lately is that I really want to continue to create a really big table where people from a lot of different spaces can come and gather, and we can find some things that we're all excited to learn or to talk about and discuss. And I think that you've done a really good job of continuing to keep that table really big, but how important it is that we have spaces where we can all gather.
Yes, especially in this era of such extreme polarization.
Yeah.
And
I mean, we're in the thickest thick of it right now.
Absolutely. And I just wish, and when I talk about this online, honestly, the first time I talked about this online, I thought it was going to be a kumbaya moment where everyone would just like the post, be like, yeah, hurrah, hurrah. And I got a lot of negative pushback just by saying, let's be friends. Let's draw a bigger circle. Let's invite people who we don't agree with to our table. Like I actually recorded a podcast episode on it because I was so taken aback by how furious people became at me for saying that. And I'm like, you don't have to change your beliefs, friends. You don't have to, jump sides. I'm just saying, eat with someone you don't agree with. See them as a human, right? It's hard to hate someone up close. You don't have to take on anything they believe. Just like treat them like a human. And people got furious. I'm like, this is scary that this is where we're at. But all of that to say, I continue to feel so passionate about that. And I think our quirky little small town that we are involved in has taught me that because, people, and I've spoke about this before, people think it's like Mayberry here. They think like it's a little commune of Jills who homestead and, have a milk cow and like homeschool their wholesome little children. That's not our community. It's not. It's hard to speak about it publicly without sounding like I'm denigrating it, as I love this place. I'm not denigrating it, but it is a hard place to live. It's the poorest community in the poorest county in Wyoming. Yeah. There's not a lot of population. There's not a lot of industry. People struggle here. It's hard. And there's a lot of drug use and there's a lot of broken families. And so carving out a space here and having businesses here has taught me a lot about what it feels like to sit at the table, literally break bread with people who have criminal records, who are not politically the same as me. I'm kind of in the middle. So I have the extreme on one side that I eat with and the extreme on the other side that I eat with. And people who are, sometimes homeless, who are active drug users. They don't look like me. We don't live the same, but I can still find common ground. And that has been probably one of the biggest lessons of my life in the last couple years, is just, it not only has shaped me and grown me, but it's an amazing feeling to go, hey, I see you as a human and you see me as a human and we can get along. And I wish more people could experience that, especially now with this polarization that we're experiencing on such a high level.
Me too. And I live in a very similar community. I live in a community where you have a lot of extremes, both, every side politically, socioeconomically, from people that a lot of drugs, very impoverished, to actually pretty wealthy. And so it just like spans a really big gap. And I love that. And a lot of people that think and are very different from me. And you said something recently that I really love. You said it was a reminder for yourself. You said that building community is beautiful, valuable, and oh so worth it, but that it's also very messy and hard.
So messy. Yeah.
And that's okay. And I saved that as a little thumbnail because it's a reminder that this is messy, like building community and owning because you own two businesses that interact at a community level, right? Like your life just isn't just online. You have the soda fountain and the charter school. Have I missed any?
No, those are our main. Yeah, those are our main local. Yeah,
that are more community facing and involved. And I think that another thing that you've pointed at is that building resiliency isn't about just self-reliance. It's about building community.
Yes.
Community strength.
Yes, which is a challenge, and I get a lot of messages from folks who are. It's hard. And I think it is indeed hard right now because people are so pigeonholed. And they're also, a lot of folks don't feel that natural human inclination towards building community that we've had since the beginning of time, because the phones are
necessary to survival.
Yes. Right. Like, it's like loneliness, they say, is, just as bad as having cancer. It's like smoking. Smoking. Yeah. It's so bad for us. And we've had the natural urge to connect since the beginning of time because our body's like, you need it. But our phones now are filling that artificially, just like the artificial flavors in food are fulfilling our need for our body telling us we need vitamins and minerals and all those things. And so I think it is indeed hard.
Back to Fred.
Brought it back to Fred. I'm now obsessed with Fred. Thank you for that. I think that it is hard. And people have asked me so many times, how did you do it? How did you find like-minded people? And I'm like, well, first off, they're not all like-minded. So put that to bed.
That's the
right
most
away.
important. That's the most important part, right?
Yep. And then you will need a few, if you're going to do big things in your area, locally, in a business, in a school, in a whatever, your community, civic involvement, you're going to need a few people in your circle that are willing to probably run alongside you pretty hard. And those people might take a while to find. We have 2 families here who we've co-created the charter school together. They are our ride or dies. We have been bonded through trauma and pain and stress now. And we, unspoken commitment, the 3 of us, that basically no matter what it takes, the charter school will thrive. Like we will do whatever it takes at personal, financial peril, whatever. It hasn't got to that point, but we were prepared to put our own money on the line last year to make this happen. So those families are our ride or die. And then there's a lot of other folks on the outer circles who have committed to us, but maybe not quite at that insane, crazy level. Yeah. So we have a few, but when you think about how many people we have contact with in our large community that, we either serve or we work with or we mentor or whatever, there's only like 4 people total that are really in that inner circle to really drive it forward. Yeah. I forgot where I was going with this, but all that to say, community, it's hard to find those people sometimes, and they're not always going to be like you, which is fine. No. So you're going to have to let that go. But the more you invest in an area, those people will rise up to the surface where you can find them and make those connections. But you have to kind of get in and get dirty first before you find the people who are going to pull alongside you. I've found. So it's not like this fairy tale where we find our magical group and then we go change the world. You got to start changing the world first, and then the people kind of show up in a weird magical way.
Oh, I really like that. You kind of have to forge the path, and you find people when you're there forging the path. Doing it, And I mean, just not to bring this up again, and it's uncomfortable, right? So that there are many uncomfortable aspects to it. I think I was caught while you were talking in a couple of different ways. There was this one part of me that I was thinking about. I think we actually romanticize the individualism of homesteading too much. Yes. We don't show community, and there's like this, we're going to move to this sort of rural space, and we're going to have cows or goats or a garden or whatever it is, but we never show, and we're going to have to work really hard to get to know our neighbors and our local community, right? Like we're not romanticizing that piece at all, or even showing that it might be necessary. And I think a lot of people find themselves having moved out into a space kind of lonely.
Yeah. Yes. I see a lot of people moving back. I'm not saying a lot. That's just my perception of, the posts I've seen on social media. But now there seems to be a movement where people who bought the homestead a couple years ago started creating content around it, and they're like, peace out. We don't want to do this anymore. And which is fine. I mean, we know not everyone will last, right? It's totally not for everyone. But I'm like, I think a big piece, and I wish more homesteaders would, like you said, prioritize the community and the relationship building grow those relationships while you're growing the vegetables and the eggs and the meat. Yeah. It's just as important.
Yeah, it's absolutely just as important, but you have to get over this piece that it's not going to be like-minded individuals, and that it's going to be, and that it's going to be a little bit messy. And because they're not like-minded, that might create even more discomfort than the discomfort of making friends as an adult, which I think is something, or making community as an adult, which is uncomfortable even with an easy crowd.
It really is, yeah.
And to pull this piece back in, this phone that I'm holding up, and I've built a lot of friendships and community there, is not a replacement, right? Like this is the processed food version of real shake your hand, give you a hug, turn a sly eye at something that you said that I might not like, and continue to be your friend kind of community that we as herd animals require.
Yes. Yes, it is it's such a false substitute. And like, again, I say that as someone who uses my phone frequently, right? And it's and that's that nuance of like I wouldn't have met you if not for the internet. I wouldn't have met so many amazing people. So it's not like, because we can't go to the, not you, but I know some people go demonize internet. Okay, all internet bad. I'm like, wait. There are good parts. I wouldn't have learned to homestead without the internet. I wouldn't have had all the opportunities. But yeah, it's that sitting in that tension of using it as a tool, but not letting it overtake us. A couple weeks ago, I had an interesting experience with my phone. Because I mean, I spend a lot of time in the community, but there are plenty of times where, the end of the day, you're tired and you opt out of a gathering because I just want to go home. We're going to just watch a show and just veg, which is fine.
You need to be
people
quiet.
should do that. I need to be quiet.
Downtime. Yeah.
Introverted, right? Tired, exhausted. Totally fine. And I think we should do that. A couple of weeks ago, I went to a horsemanship clinic, and it was in Jackson, Wyoming, out on a ranch with 0 cell reception, nothing. So I'm staying in my horse trailer at this ranch, and there's other, there's a guest ranch that was hosting the clinic. So there were people around, and the lodge was the gathering place for the meals, and that's where people were hanging out. So normally, just with my introvert self, after a long day of riding, I'd be like, peace out, homies. I'm going back to the trailer. I'm going to probably veg, watch a show, check my Instagram, and go to bed. And what I found myself, we get done riding at 5, and I'm tired, right? It's been a long day in the heat.
Yeah.
I go back to my trailer and I sit there for 30 minutes. There's nothing on my phone. My phone is out. I'm like, I think I'm going to go to the lodge and just talk to some people. I'm just going to go hang out. And I'm introverted. Once again, I don't crave small talk. I don't crave random conversations, but I was craving it that week because there was no phone. I couldn't call my husband. I couldn't check in with the kids. I couldn't check Instagram. And so I was like, whoa, this is one day of this. And I'm already feeling the need to connect with real humans because the phone is out of the picture. And I'm like, how much is this affecting our society? It's a little scary to think about.
It is a little scary to think about. And I know I've shared this with you, this past year and a half, I've been mostly alone on the farm.
Yeah.
And seeing the health effects, at one point I used a continuous glucose monitor, and even the way I eat, my glucose was out of control, a stress effect, and has settled back down as things have shifted back into being in community and being with people. It was wild. We need people. And I think that urge to reach out that keeps us glued to our phones is a very honest urge.
Mm-hmm,
and not a bad one. And what I want to get into next is the both and of it. But we also need real, tactile, touch it, be in it, human community where we are.
Absolutely. And the research around that has been so interesting. I dove into that a little bit when I wrote Old Fashioned on Purpose. I'm trying to remember the name of the book. Sherry Turkle wrote it. Conversations, something.
I'll look this up.
It's like a 2-word title. Sherry Turkle. But she writes about, she did all the study, and it was such a good book on just the effects that social media has on our culture, like we've been talking about, but just the difference in our physiology when we are sitting face to face and knee to knee and engaging with, the facial expressions and the body language. And we need that. It's so important.
And the mystery of it, right? I mean, the sharing of a microbiome, I think, in ways that we can't understand how that affects us. The sharing of pheromones and oxytocin that we get from looking at facial cues that I don't think we can fully codify, right? Yes. That there's so much that's happening in that in-person connection. And I think it's funny because we see this all the time with our animals, right? All the body language and pheromones and things that go into their being together and receiving cues of safety or cues of danger within their herd setting is a lot of things that could never be communicated through a device. And they're things that we might not even be aware that we're communicating or sharing, our little bugs when we hug each other.
Yes. I also think so much about, when you're with a friend, or maybe you're trying to make a connection with someone you've just met, and something happens and you both kind of give each other a look, that knowing look.
Yeah.
And then you laugh. And that moment, it always feels so good. You're sharing a little secret. We those little things we completely miss on the phone when we have our responses so well crafted, you can check the text. And so, like you said, it's a mystery that we don't even realize how much we're missing. And maybe in the decades to come, we'll have some big fancy studies where everyone will be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that back in the, 2020s, that we're not interacting face to face.
Yeah.
But right now we're semi-oblivious. And I say that with myself as well. I think, we just don't know what we don't know.
I wish we didn't need a study to confirm it.
Also that,
and
back back to our obsession with experts. We do, yes.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make the New York Times unless there's a study and then no one pays attention.
Nope. Yep. Yeah. And I just, that moment, that organic moment of, one of the things I've thought a lot about, there's a book, Francis Willer's The Wild Edge of Sorrow. And he talks about grief in a lot of different forms, both in losing people that we love, but also the grief that we might feel at the loss of the village, at the loss of the community that we once had. And one thing that I've thought a lot about is the opportunity, you said that we have these really polished responses to one another online, that we can't just share that kind of organic look that really connects you into somebody. And I think that polishing and that constant being this very manicured self, we are missing the opportunity to witness humans humaning in their imperfection, in their grief, in their triumph, in their messy moments, right? Because we only see the polished thing. And I think that's something that we're missing, both in community and in what you just said, is the mess.
Yes. And I think that's why, we talk so much about the effects of social media, and especially on, kids and young girls, and the comparison, and how social media is creating depression because everyone thinks that everyone's better off than they are, right? And so we get into that comparison trap. And I think it's that polish coming in again. No one's polished. We all have skeletons and mess and dust bunnies.
Yes.
Like, we're all a disaster in our own way.
Yes.
But no one is seeing that anymore. And we're missing the vulnerability. And so now we think we're the only ones who's a disaster. Everyone else is fine. And that's just, mental health is not great.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. There's a real connector there to mental health and thinking that everybody else is polished and we're the only one that's not. I call this I'm not special. I try to remind myself of this often. Like, this feeling that I'm having is not unique to me. In fact, it's quite universal. And I think that again is what we're missing and not being in community, is seeing that is universal.
Yep.
And that we're not special in the best way.
Nope, we are. It's been there, done that.
You said something, that we can use the phone as a tool without it overtaking us. And one of my big bold pieces of type here as I prepared this interview was both and. And one of the things that I think you do so beautifully is that you are a both and person. You are old-fashioned and modernity. You are one thing that I noticed. So you're both and a little paradoxical, which is the best. You think a lot about how to save time and how to create some efficiency while also taking a lot of time to do things. And I think, again, like in your both andness of old-fashioned and modernity, and saving time and taking time, and being unconventional and prepared, but also not overdoing, paranoia and consuming fear, right? All these both ands. It's a really special place to be. And so I kind of want to tease at that, whether it's through the modernity and old-fashioned, and all of that, because then I have this little quote here that you said, once again, I find myself choosing both and instead of either or, sitting in the gray, soaking in the nuance, and considering both sides. And so I think as we talk about this through a computer, and we both use our phones for work in a lot of different ways, there's a both and to this.
It is. And it is the paradoxes just crack me up about myself. Cause and it's funny when people they'll try to catch me, right? They like to point out, they'll be like, oh, you're a hypocrite. I've had people go, oh, you're talking about not watching TV for a month. Cause we had a thing where we took like a TV fast.
Yeah, I remember that.
3 months or 6 months, whatever. And people were like, oh, you're posting this on a phone. And I'm like, yes, Barbara. I am posting.
Yes, Barbara. It's always Deborah for me. Deborah's
the Deborahs. No offense to anyone named Barbara and Deborah. I'm sure you're lovely people. But every once in a while there's a clunker, y'all. There's a clunker, and her name's often Barbara or Deborah.
There is. Oh, wow. People trying to catch you in hypocrisy.
And it's funny because I'm like, well, I did realize that I am on social media posting about the TV, but okay. But I was like, it's okay to do both. I'm doing both. And they just couldn't get it through their mind that it's both and. But I think it's so common through so many things. We see it's just easier to be dogmatic. It's easier to be extreme. And people in every area of life, it's just easier. And I used to be so much that person, the most dogmatic, the most judgmental, the most black and white. And as I just grew up and matured a little bit, it started by asking better questions and being more curious. And when I started to do those two things, I started to realize that the truth is never on the extremes. It's always somewhere in the middle, and it's messy and it's nuanced and it's gray. And I don't know, it was just, I guess, committing to having a little more intellectual honesty with myself that I was able to kind of come to that point. But yeah, it's harder to create content around both and. It's harder to live your life around both and. And I think that's why in our society, especially right now, we just gravitate towards that black and white. But yeah.
I think that happens too. And I want to kind of push at this in lifestyle, that when you opt into being a homesteader, it can suddenly become this thing where I'm going to do everything the old-fashioned way at cost to maybe my mental health or my ability to be in community or in relationship or to some of the time of other things that I want to fill my life with and that give my life a sense of purpose. And so sort of eschewing all modernity, maybe at a certain cost. And I know that I'm gonna pick on a really weird example, but I know that you and I have both been known to use electric milkers.
Would never do such a the horror of that.
The horror. Must hand milk into pail at cost of time, knees, hands.
I want to see those bleeding fingers. I want the cramps. I want the whole experience.
And what I'll say about this is that like I am an all-in kind of person.
Yes.
And I often learn by going all in, going to an extreme, and then having that internal checkpoint that you've so beautifully illustrated of like checking back in and being like, okay, wait, why am I doing this? Is this serving me? Is this serving whatever purpose that I'm looking to fill in this space? And then maybe coming back a little bit of the way.
So much that. And I guess people they might see me now, oh, she's, so sophisticated being in the middle. No, I have to bounce off. I have bounced off the edges many times before I end up in the middle. And I did that in my early years of homesteading. I was still more in my dogmatic phase. And so I was like, we are going extreme, and I am never buying food at the store again. And I am going to make everything from scratch. And I did that for not very long until I was like reduced to a puddle of tears and stress and complete overwhelm. And I'm like, I don't think this is the best way to do this. So maybe we should try something else. And so that's when I started to go, okay, wait, I can make the soap without stirring it by hand for 3 hours because time is important. Time is valuable. So I'm going to use an electric blender, or the milking. Love the milking. But do I need to spend all this time under the cow to be like a martyr for the milk? Or could I get the same result with electricity? And I know everyone has a different conclusion, but you do have to kind of bounce. I had to try. I'm all in also. I'm extremely passionate, extremely type A, whatever that means.
Me too.
But I go all in. And that's why I've been successful in things because I go to the nth degree, but also sometimes I have to go, wait. Where's reason? Where is it? Oh, here it is. I'm going to stay here.
Yeah, and to find a blend of things. And I think too that is a big thing that attracts me to the newsletters you put out and to the book and to your content and to the podcast, because there's a little bit of that and I know that you said in the book that it's modernity and old fashioned, that you won't buy an air fryer, but you love your slow cooker, that you refuse to heat your greenhouse with fossil fuels, but sometimes you use a machine to milk the cow, that you insist on making popcorn on the stovetop, but use your microwave for reheating leftovers. And I think that there's a lot of us that need to bounce consistently off to find the center and maybe, or to find our place in things. I don't even want to say the center because it's not even necessarily a two-dimensional plane. But that we need to bounce off the extremes and to go all in to find the sweet spot of doing these things.
Yes.
And I think that's also something, missing, from in your world from homesteading, in my world from some of the health things, right? Like we have to go all the way to, a carnivore diet, or all the way to whatever it is to find where we need to be. And I think we need to encourage more of that experimentation.
I agree.
With that checkpoint of self-reflection.
Because I will always love the crazy passionate people, right? Who are wild-eyed and just going for it. I'm like, those are my people. I'm drawn to
100%.
Yeah. And you're going to do some bouncing. You're going to run into the brick wall a few times, and that's fine. But I think you nailed it. Can we continue to come back and examine and ask the questions and go, okay, wait, I went all the way. Do I need to stay there? Where else can I go? Where else can I land? And I think that's the key. Go extreme, try it, go all the way in, and then be willing to check back in with yourself later. And the other piece, I think the part where people get stuck with the extremes to the point of their own detriment is because we get locked into a club or a tribe.
Yep.
And then we feel like I can't not extreme, because then the club will kick me out, or the tribe, I won't count anymore. I won't check all the boxes. So I think you have to
be a part of the herd.
Won't be a part of the herd. And homesteaders, y'all, there's still a herd. There is still a herd of homesteaders, as contrarian as we may be. So I think as long as we can be honest with ourselves and go, okay, wait, I'm staying here to this extreme. I'm not happy, but I'm doing it so I don't get kicked out of the club. Well, that's not important. So I'm going to go back where it's right for me. I think that's a really important piece too.
Do you have an anchor for identifying, when you come back to that, I heard you call it an internal locus of control. And I was just like, dang, Jill's the best, right? When you when you come back to that question, and when you anchor into, is there a set of values that you're returning to, or specific questions that you ask yourself to check in with? How is this serving me, and to bring this word back, my purpose? Like, do you have questions that you ask, or values that anchor you, something that helps keep you to you, and not the extremes, not the edges?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've tried to quantify that. I love formulas, but I can't see
you and me both.
There is no formula. Yep. Type A. We love our checklists. I think it comes back. I have developed my sense of intuition and my gut feelings over the years, because I didn't used to, and I've really tried to listen to that. And so now, I have different values and things that govern my life. But I think more than anything, when I'm really honest with myself and I go, okay, wait, is this serving me and the mission and the family and what I want to do? Or is this something that I'm just doing for appearances, or to check a box, or just because? And I think as long as I'm able to get quiet and tune into my gut and, really with my body and go, is this working? I get the answer there time and again. And usually it comes back to, if it's lighting me up, if it's making me excited, then yes, it's a go. And I'll do the harder thing, and I'll spend more time and do the slower path to get that result. And generally, if I'm doing it to keep up appearances, or to fulfill obligations for someone else, or just to check it off because that's what somebody thought I should do, that's where my body will be like, no, this is cut it out. It's not good. So it's just been honing that intuition, I think, has been the biggest marker for me.
Yeah. Do you feel it in your body in a particular place, either within your body or when you're, for example, in the garden or on a walk? Like, is there a quietness that is requisite for feeling it?
Definitely. Anything manual labor is where I can get in tune with myself, whether it's riding, walking, gardening, cooking, sometimes just quiet in the kitchen. And I don't have a particular place I feel it in my body. Some people will say their heart or their stomach, or,
I don't either.
It's just more of an energy where when it's something that I'm like, obligation, my body just feels blah and neutral and kind of like almost a negative repulsion. Again, not as super noticeable, not super visceral, but just just a sense. And then if it's something that I'm drawn towards, the energy comes up, and I feel more attracted to it, more magnetic. So just paying attention to those little things.
I like that. Thank you for humoring me and answering that. I noticed something about some of the things that you listed, manual labor and cooking and these things. And I wanted to tug a little bit in this episode on fun, because some of the things you listed were I call it type 2 fun. I like a challenge.
Yes.
It may be a little bit of pain, a little bit of discomfort.
Yeah.
He's kind of a comic. He's kind of a comic artist, and he talks a lot about exercise, but he talks about uphill people versus downhill people. That as exercisers, you see a lot of people that like to go uphill, and that's mostly what they do. They like the discomfort, they like the challenge. Then you get downhill people. You know, they're just having a blast skiing down the hill and all of this fun.
Yeah.
And you had a controversial take on fun not too long ago, and one thing I recognized in what you mentioned when I asked if there was a space is they were a lot of those places where flow happens that might be considered type 2 fun or fun that isn't type 2 fun. For those that are listening that don't know, is fun where you do something really hard and it may not feel fun in the moment, but it feels really good at the end of it when you're looking back.
Yeah. I'm a total type 2 fun person, as you know. Yeah. Like, yeah. Anything. And it's not, I had to be careful because when I started talking about this, I had a lot of people who were in the same boat as us. Like I think homesteaders by and large are going to be a little more gluttons for the punishment of doing a hard job. Mm-hmm. But then I had other people who were like, no, I like regular fun. I'm like, that's fine. You don't have to be, this martyr for fun, but like, it's fine. But like, I used to feel really bad. Like I used to feel guilty because friends would be like, do you want to go to get a pedicure or a manicure? Or do you want to go to a concert or go shopping? And I'm like, it sounds really horrible, but thank you for asking. I didn't say that, but it just didn't, it doesn't do anything for me. It just doesn't do anything for me. Well, other people, that's like lighting them up. And I'd be like, what's wrong with me? Like, am I a workaholic? Is there something wrong with my perception of life? Like, am I not connecting with people enough? But then when I really started to analyze it, it really comes down to the flow state for me. And like, I love when it's a little bit hard and I have to push through and there's that question, can I do it? Can I get it done? Yeah. Man, the dopamine I get after that, I'm addicted to it. Like I am utterly addicted to it. And I feel like to me, there's no other substitute for that. And I'm finding more and more people in that vein, which is interesting. And maybe it's my niches that I run in, but it's nice to find the people who are like, I like to do the hard things too. And it feels good.
It is. And I think it's a testament that you can, and I've wondered at this, and I'll throw this to you. What is it in our human that likes a challenge, right? Because you talk a lot about this in the book, and we both look a lot at this in our work, right? Is what makes us human. And I think that there is this component of being human that is moving through discomfort and moving through challenge, and that we find flow, maybe fun, satisfaction, purpose, something in there that keeps us coming back to wanting to move through it.
Yes. And I wish I understood more about that wiring, but because it does seem like our brains are intrinsically wired to seek that out. Like it's very, very primal. And I suspect that even folks who aren't type 2 fun people, who are more conventional fun people, I still 100% believe that we still need challenges. And I think that's such a huge piece of our, the misery of modernity is that it's too easy. It's too easy. And it's this juxtaposition because we need challenge, we need the hard. But we also, humans also like the path of least resistance. We're wired to not expend energy for no reason, because in a survival situation, you're not going to go walk 20,000 steps just for the hell of it. You're going to reserve energy, do the easy thing. So I think those two urges are constantly battling. But if we can have that higher order thinking and move past the least resistant pull of our brain and lean into the hard, or even I was talking to my kids the other day, just even little things like we were talking about moving our bodies and being physically active and how I was like, I try to build that into my day. So I'll park farther away from the store, which is like kind of an old, a cliche, but park farther away. Or like at the airport, I always take the stairs instead of the escalator. Or sometimes I'll carry something instead of using a wheelbarrow, because I'm either going to go to the gym and work out, or I'm going to work out in my everyday. But I'm like, it's that a lot of people, I don't think, haven't tapped into that thought process yet of like choosing the hard and choosing that harder thing. And so that path of least resistance takes hold. And I think it's making us miserable. I truly do. I think it's making us miserable and we don't realize it.
You had a quote. I was trying to find it in my notes, and I have a lot of notes on here. You have a note about that there is this aspect of modernity that makes everything easy, and that maybe there's a piece of us that is actually longing for a challenge, that is yearning for something a little bit more difficult. And I won't speak to the mechanism of wiring, but there's a great book on dopamine called The Molecule of More. And there's a reward circuit that happens, and this is my most salient memory of it, but don't quote me on any of this. And it's called a reward prediction error, right? And it's so when we don't expect a reward and it occurs, that has this really big dopamine push.
Yes.
And as an example of this, if you're out on a walk and, pre-agricultural, and all of a sudden you find a bush with sugary red berries on it that you can eat, that is this absolute surprise and delight. And because it's sugary and therefore nutrient dense for building fat for the winter, our bodies, it's firing on all cylinders. We put it in our mouth. Dopamine is going wild. Yes. And there it is. And so I'll just reference people to that book, but I think that really captivated me. I can't find the precise quote from it, but that modernity does offer a lot of ease. And I think we're want to take the easy path. I think that there's something in our wiring too that is also about making things as easy as possible in landscapes that have traditionally been hard. So I think that this is also part of what it is to be human.
Yes.
And it's finding the balance between those two things,
which is tricky, right? And it's that the tension. Because like I talk about in the book, like I have a washing machine and a dryer. I'm not doing it with a plunger and a bucket, and I have a gas stove. I'm not building a fire every day to cook my food. And so I appreciate that. I also do love a hot shower. I would be very upset if I couldn't have a shower at night. I do love a shower. Like I'm a princess about that.
Over here.
Yeah. Just like I gotta have it. So I love that. I don't have to go. I had I'll never forget a wonderful woman on my podcast a couple years ago. They live completely off grid, super inspiring. But we were talking about the process of taking a bath, and it's over 2 hours just to haul the water to the tub. And she has a wood stove that she's heating each pot to put in the bathtub. And I'm like, number one, I admire your commitment, but I don't want to do that. Like I want to turn on the hot water. And so part of me, I'm just like everybody else, give me modernity, give me the advancements. Thank you, Industrial Revolution. And then the other, our good old friend, the Industrial Revolution. And then the other part of me is like, wait, but I've also seen when that goes too far, and I see what happens when it's too easy, both physically and mentally. So it's like, wait, I got to go back here. So it's that constant tension of which pieces do I keep, which pieces do I reject?
Yeah. And living in that tension. And I think you help people live in that tension. I actually really want to point at this because this was something, and I think I've shared this I am not a gardener. I like raising animals because I don't have to weed them. It's true. You don't. It's not my strong suit. And you had a whole piece this summer that I really loved, and it had a lot of layers to it about letting a garden be easy. And so there was this piece, and it was a lot about thinking about place and where you are and what grows best with where you are. But you are also very, like, when I see sensible people that make me want to be a better gardener, you are one of those people. Of not, it doesn't feel like it has to be this, this momentous, overly difficult thing. And yet, and so I'm going to bring in, because we're working a lot with tension. There's this other piece, and I've thought a lot about this past year, of the lengths that you will go to not to spend 45 minutes at the grocery store.
Totally. It's ridiculous. Like, it is so ridiculous. Like, I know, like, common sense wise, you're like, oh my gosh, you can't even think about it. Yeah, totally. Isn't it crazy?
Yeah. It really is. And I love both of these things, right? Because, and what I like about it, and what I've been thinking about more for raising animals, because I'm not a gardener, is how can this be something that is functional and relatively efficient within my life, that doesn't have to be this monumental task, right? That's part of having an electric milker.
Yeah.
And it's also, I recognize the time investment that it is against the alternative of going to the grocery store. And I thought a lot about this with, I've been milking the goats a lot and making a lot of cheese, and I'm just obsessed and loving it. And I was like, I'm putting 7 hours a week into this between milking, cleaning, making cheese, all these things.
Yep.
And at the same time, it didn't feel like all that much because I really do actually try to streamline it into being efficient and fitting in my lifestyle. You were able to hold this tension.
I try. I don't know if I'm always holding it. Sometimes it's spilling out and dropping on the floor, but
yes, me too. Yeah, I mean, the amount of projects that are falling the wayside is it's a lot.
Yeah. I love this point though, because it's both and, right? Mm-hmm. And I've really been wrestling with that's why I wrote about it this summer, the let it be easy mindset, because I do love hard and I love uncomfortable. So I will sometimes overcomplicate things just to feel like I did it better. And I've found this in business a lot. I have a business coach who calls me out on it constantly. Like I would make these most elaborate courses and sales pages and products, and it would take me 6 months to do it, and it had to be perfect. And I overproduced everything. And he's like, Jill, knock it off. And one time, just to prove his point, he had me produce a course in 2 weeks. And it ended up being the same caliber and just as good of a product, and everyone loved it just as much. And I just didn't overproduce it, and it was easier.
Ooh, and you're speaking to me right now.
Yeah, I don't deserve it because it didn't take 6 months. It's not as good. And he's like, it's just as good. It just you didn't have to make it hard for it to count. So I still wrestle with that. My inclination is to martyr it out, baby. Like we're just going to suffer and bleed and crawl on our hands and knees to get to the finish line. Sometimes that's necessary. With a charter school, that was necessary. Yeah. It took that, but it's not always necessary. And so I'm trying to be honest with myself. When am I overcomplicating? When do I just need to let things flow? And that's a hard question sometimes.
Yeah. I feel like you just spoke directly to me, and you said something, I don't deserve it because it wasn't hard enough.
Yeah.
I think that's something that is a trap I frequently fall into, and of having to get something to a place of my own standards, my own overly high standards and expectations. And if I don't meet them, then it's not enough. It's not enough to just put it out there, and becoming a martyr to that. Mm-hmm. And so that word, and I was really caught in it this summer when you said it, just let it be easy.
And I have to give credit. I didn't come up with that. It was, Greg McKeown, the one who wrote Essentialism. Okay. He wrote another book, which I cannot remember. I'm the worst at remembering books. I read a lot of books. I just don't remember any of their titles.
You don't need to. I'll find them.
It was his follow-up to Essentialism, but he had that phrase in that book. And that was my big takeaway, was right to the heart.
Yeah. We need to let this be easy.
And I think it was either in his book or somewhere else. I think it goes back, that idea that we don't deserve it unless we bleed for it is kind of a puritanical mindset that we're still carrying forth in our Western culture, that if it's not hard and miserable and horrible, it's not worthy. And I think we still have pieces of that. And that's where that comes from, which is fascinating to me.
Oh, that is fascinating to me too. That's something I'm going to leave this podcast and I'm going to tug on that, because that is a very ingrained worldview for me. Mm-hmm. Yep. Not for others too. It only applies. I'm very special. I'm the only one that has to suffer. I don't want other people to suffer.
No, if everyone else is it's easy, I'm like, oh, I'm so glad for you. That's fantastic. But not me. I need to be bloody and miserable while I'm doing it.
Yeah. Thank you for that, because I'm gonna be noodling on that and considering where I'm not pausing to ask that question of, does this have to be hard in this way? What purpose is it serving with my making it hard?
It's a big one. Oof, it's a big one.
I want to, I'm sure we're kind of winding down, but I do want to tease at your entrepreneurial spirit. And I one of the reasons that I open up pretty much every newsletter that you send is that I think that you have a lot of salient advice for how to think about business. And something that comes up is and now I'm going to forget the name of a book. You had a whole newsletter about your ideas with the soda fountain and perhaps selling it. And you mentioned the 10X by Dan.
10X is greater than 2X, Benjamin Hardy.
There we go. I was way off.
Right before it left my brain. Never happens. Yes.
And again, like, you are such a generalist. And I actually think that one of the ways that you add a lot of value to my life through your work is in talking about how you think about business. And you just mentioned that you have a business coach and you run a lot of different businesses. And I really respect that, because having a lot of irons in the fire is hard.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so yeah, several things on that. I found I didn't come into business knowing I would like business until later in my 20s. Like we already married, and like I kind of thought business wasn't for people like me. And then I realized that wasn't the case. And I love it. And that's another paradox. I love the slowness of homesteading. I love being in my kitchen in silence making cheese. I also love being in the middle of a launch, knee deep, tech problems, emails, ding, ding, ding. I just love that pressure. I just crave it. I love both of them, which is weird, but that's, yeah.
It's not. I think we're more paradoxical than we give ourselves credit for.
And that's good. And it's a good thing. It's a good thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
I read that book. It was a fantastic book, and I highly recommend it.
I read it after you sent it.
Yes. I also had a lot of very specific things that I thought I would implement after that book. And I had a very clear plan of how that would look in 2024. And the universe, or whatever you want to call it, said, good ideas, but there's other plans here. There's other paths. And so I still feel like my goal is still streamlining this year, but the streamlining has looked very different than I thought it would. And even in the midst of streamlining, I am still designed to be a generalist. I am still wired to be a generalist, and I still will always have multiple things. And so it's been a very fascinating year to see, especially after my grand public declarations in January, to see where things have ended up thus far. But yeah.
I think that's the reality, though. And I think as people, and I'll just speak for myself, but I think that you might agree. I have a lot of aspirations, and I like to do a lot of personal work in order to better support my dreams and my aspirations in this life. And I like to have a lot of those internal checkpoints of like, how are my businesses serving me? How might this work better? What is and isn't working for my life and what I want going forward?
Yes.
And there are a lot of best laid plans, and then there's what shows up. And I actually think that the real work is in adapting and pivoting and being present with what actually shows up, and taking some of these big high level concepts that are very perfect and shiny.
Yes.
And actually putting them on something that is messy and unwieldy.
So messy. Yes. So well said. So well said. Yeah. And that's what it's been. And it's funny, when I was younger, my type A self, I was the queen of goals. Like, I had vision boards, I had goal lists, and they would come true. Like, things, I would get them crossed off. Like, I had some of my most audacious visions on those vision boards from my early 20s. They have happened. And then there came a point in life, I don't know if life switched or just my maturity shifted, where I still have aspirations. I still have targets. I still have things I'm aiming for. But man, they don't ever end up quite where I thought they were. They end up usually better. And I can't ever see that back when I'm setting the intention. And I've learned to flow so much, to the point where people now ask me, what's your big goals? What's your next project? And I'm like, I don't know. I know it will be something awesome. I can feel the energy coming together. I can feel the excitement, but I don't know what it is yet. And that would freak me out so much 10 years ago. And now I'm like, I'm flowing, baby. I'm just like, whatever comes, I'll say yes to the right things. I will examine them. And I'm like, it's wild, but we've ended up on paths I never thought, because I've let go of those goals, which is weird, because I still believe in goals and I think goals are important, but man, it's just so much more fluid than it was. And I can't decide if that's just my path has changed or my perception has changed, but it's interesting.
I love that, because I think it's really good to have a North Star, or to have this idea that maybe it's just an idea that sets you off on a path. It's not even a North Star so much, right? Like, it gets
Yeah.
you going. It gets those first steps in. But I think, in the spirit of this conversation, often those are very simple things. And what we end up with as goals or dreams, or what shows up, is very complex in a way that I
Yes.
don't think we could imagine. Like, I don't think we could plan that level of complexity and weird stuff that comes together that we never expected. And when it coalesces, it's even juicier than the way that we painted it in this simple vision.
So much juicier, which that's what I've learned is I'm like, okay, I'm definitely going to let go of this rigidity, because I like what comes when I just am flexible and I flow. Yeah. It's so much better, but you can't foresee all of that, which is exciting and scary, but mostly exciting.
Maybe a good place and to take this as we kind of really wrap up is, you got to rope this year, which was a big dream and maybe a big goal. And you said something that stayed with me when we had our picnic, which is that there are times when you're pinching yourself, that something has come to fruition. And I think maybe roping was one of these things. And I haven't gotten to hear how it was, how roping was.
Roping was so good. Yeah. And just to give a little background to everyone who wasn't at our gazebo picnic.
Sorry, everyone. You missed out.
You missed out. And some of my audience, if they're listening, they know the story. But I've been into horses since I was a little girl. It's been one of my primary North Stars. It got me to Wyoming. It started the whole homestead thing. And I've done a lot of horsemanship. I've worked for trainers. I've done a lot. But one gap in that has been, I've never really learned to rope. And I felt like it was something I always wanted. And then I told myself as I got older, well, I'm too old, and most, honestly, most women who rope have husbands who rope. Mm-hmm. And so the husbands, they just learn it by osmosis from their husbands. And my husband doesn't rope. So that was another block. I'm like, you just don't, it's hard to go get roping lessons. You kind of have to know the people. And I just had told myself all these stories. And so finally, but thanks to the personal development of homesteading and entrepreneurship, I'm like, this is a dumb story, Jill. Why are you telling yourself this story? So long story short, I started getting some lessons and started learning and practicing. Absolutely horrendous at first. Like the absolute worst roper ever. I kept at it, because I've learned you start off as a beginner, a messy beginner, and you keep going. Thank you, homesteading, for that lesson. And thank you, business ownership, for that lesson. And my big goal for 3 years has been to rope at a branding locally, which is kind of a whole thing. And, everyone there at the branding is there to work. They're not there to babysit someone. So you kind of have to roll in with a certain level of I'm not going to get in the way. I'm not going to die. I'm going to try not to hurt anyone else by, getting the calf under their horse. Yeah. And so, I saw the brandings coming up. I'm like, I'm not going to skip out this year, because I'd skipped out 2 years on that. And I held myself to it, showed up, totally wanted to throw up as I'm getting my horse ready, super nervous. And we did it. And we roped at 4 brandings. And it's something so silly. And I'm sure all the guys there who do it all the time had no idea. But I was just like, little girl Jill would have died, completely beside herself that I did it. And it was just one of those moments, you come full circle and you're like, you fulfilled that childhood dream. And it's amazing. And it goes back, to the beginning of our conversation. It was hard. It was extremely uncomfortable. At every step.
The learning it, and then also the stepping in to do it.
Stepping into the branding pin that first day, I was shaking. And the first day was so funny. Anyone who was who knew my situation, because there were a couple cowboys who knew I was learning and it was my first time. They were in another pin. So I was roping my first calf, and I had all the cowboys who didn't know me from Adam. Right. And we're there was a whole line of them standing with their arms crossed. Yeah. Come on, girl, get the calf so we can proceed with the job. We're not here for fun. This is a job. We're on the payroll. And so I'm like, oh my gosh. And so I go in there and it was like a movie moment. I throw my first loop and catch both hind feet, dally and drag it to the fire. And I'm like, yeah, look at me. I know what I'm doing.
Wow. I just got chills.
Yeah. It was
the dopamine.
It was the dopamine. I didn't sleep for days. I was like a dopamine high, wide-eyed. My husband's like, calm down. And I missed other calves after that, but it was that full
right out of the gate.
Okay, you did the hard thing. You committed to it. You held yourself to it. You did the work. You are the messy beginner, but you're still moving forward. Man, it felt amazing. So that's the piece, whether it's homesteading, running a business, being involved in your community. That's what I want people to feel. It doesn't have to be roping, but that's that arc of, man, the hard thing is worth it. Dig in, get messy, get uncomfortable, because it pays off in really big ways.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, and what a perfect message. I think just even for me right now, I know that I'm going to take that away, and I know that other people will too. What did I miss? Is anything else present with this conversation?
This was like the best. No, we covered all the fun ground, the juicy ground that I never get to talk about. So I can't think of anything you missed.
Good. Yeah. I was so looking forward to this, and I really just, in going back over all of your offerings, I felt really grateful for what I've had a chance to learn from you that maybe doesn't feel like the obvious things, but just something about grit and determination and showing up, and the way that you think about business and the way that you think about your growth. That was really present for me, and I've taken a lot away from you in that regard, and I'm really grateful for it.
Well, thank you. And I feel the same with your content, just the depth that you go. Also your interviews, like, you make me want to be a better interviewer, because you really draw out the threads, the common threads, and the depth that a lot of folks don't. And I know I can be better at that. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for
I
that.
always appreciate your perspective.
Well,
you bring the table and everything.
I appreciate sharing books with you. I mean, whether it's getting 10x is greater than 2x with you, or I think we shared our love of Dan Egan's Phosphorus, The Devil's Paradox. Guys, speaking of paradox,
read that book. Yeah.
I think we shared that love.
Yes.
And as we close out, I want to make sure people know this week your planner came out.
The planner did come out. Yes.
The planner is available and should be available when this episode is released. Still, I know it's a limited run, but I think it'll still be available. And you have just all kinds of offerings. You have Mealcraft, which we didn't get a chance to talk about, but I feel like is such a great example of your efficiency meets time well spent.
Right. We're going to save time, but not so much that we're going to buy the food from the store. We're still going to make it, but we're going to do it in, all the paradox isn't rolled up into Mealcraft. Yes.
Yep. And your podcast and your book, and I'll have links to all of those things and your social media. And is there anything I left out that you want to make sure people know about?
I think you nailed it. Yeah.
Okay.
You've wrapped it up well. Yeah.
Great. Jill, it's a pleasure. This was, I've been excited about having this on the calendar, and it lit me up, and it was even better than I imagined.
Yes,
a little bit of dopamine.
I'm getting all the dopamine now. So yes, thank you for this. I was also very much looking forward to it. And thank you for still having me on after I ghosted you for 3 months.
Anytime. You can ghost me anytime.
I'll say you can ghost me too. We're always good. So
we're always good in the ghosting.
Yes.
Okay.
This has been the best. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Mind, Body, and Soil podcast. If what you found resonated with you, may I ask that you share it with your friends or leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts? This act of reciprocity helps others find Mind, Body, and Soil. If you're looking for more, you can find us at groundworkcollective.com and at Kate_Kavanaugh, that's KATE_KAVANAUGH on Instagram. I would like to give a very special thank you to China and Seth Kent of the band All Right for the clips from their beautiful song Over the Edge from their album The Crucible. You can find them at All Right on Instagram and wherever you listen to music.